Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Tori and welcome back to another tier list. This is going to be ranking the top 30 starting point guards in the NBA. We're going to be doing this for every single position. So we're going to go point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center. Point guard should be the funnest one in my opinion because I think this might be the most stacked position in the entire NBA. The depth in this position is really good, so it's going to be hard to rank some of these guys as mediocre starters, but we're going to have to do it. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, make sure to do so. Leave me a donation on Patreon if you want to support me, and if you want to guest on my upcoming podcasts. The information for that Patreon stuff is down in the description below as well. And with all that being said, let's start ranking some of these point guards. So we're starting off with Kyle Lowry, who is borderline good starter, all-star. He won a championship last season. I think he's a little bit underrated, but I think he's getting up there in age, so I think he's going to decline a little bit. Last season, he might have been an all-star caliber point guard, but I think this season, he's at the top of the good starter tier. Next, we have Westbrook, who I don't think is a superstar anymore. He's putting up superstar numbers if you just look at points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, but people are kind of catching on to the fact that he stat chases, he stat hunts, as well as the fact that he doesn't really help his team win as many games as you'd think. And then in the playoffs, he's been bad. We all know what happened last season when Damian Lillard waved him off the court after Russell Westbrook talk crap to Damian Lillard all season long. So I'm not putting Russ as a superstar. And here we go with another good starter. That's Eric Bledsoe. He's underrated for the Milwaukee Bucks. Solid defender, attacks the rim really well, and is an athletic, strong guard. He's a fun guy to watch, and I think good starter is the perfect tier for him. Here we go with Kemba Walker, another all-star caliber guard, made the transition to Boston. It'll be interesting to see how he plays next to some actual NBA caliber players because he hasn't had much talent next to him in Charlotte over all these years. It'll be nice to see him finally get in the playoffs. I know he made it that one year with Charlotte, but that's it. I think he might have made it when he was a Bobcat. I don't really know. He's definitely one of the most likable guys in the league, and he's definitely an all-star caliber point guard. And here we go with Chris Paul. Chris Paul has been declining because he's getting up there in age. So he's kind of like Lowry. He probably was an all-star caliber guard a year or two ago, but he's had a little bit of injury issues. His age isn't on his side, so at this point, now that he's with the Oklahoma City Thunder, he's definitely not an all-star caliber guard. I still say he's probably a good starter. And here we go with Ben Simmons, and if Ben Simmons was in the Western Conference, he probably wouldn't even have a chance at ever making an NBA All-Star game in my opinion. You look at a guy like CJ McCollum. If CJ McCollum was in the Eastern Conference, he would make an NBA All-Star game. He'd probably be a 3-4-time NBA All-Star. So I know Ben Simmons was voted an All-Star last season, but compared to the rest of the point guards in the league, if things were balanced, I don't think he'd be an All-Star level player. So I don't have him as an All-Star caliber player. I have him as a very good starter. And here we go with Steph Curry, first superstar. This one's obvious. I don't even really need to say anything about this one. Steph is the best point guard in the league, and therefore he's a superstar. Here we go with Mike Conley, yet another good starter. I'm filling up this tier a little bit too much. It'll be interesting to see him play next to Donovan Mitchell next season. He's playing for the Jazz. That's a perfect team for him in my opinion. He makes that team a lot more deadly. He's a very good player. Now we have Darren Collison, who retired, so therefore he's a bad starter because he's not even a starter. And here we go with oh, that's Chris Dunn. Okay. I couldn't recognize him for a second. I couldn't tell what jersey that was. Chris Dunn, he hasn't panned out so far in the NBA. He's a bad starter at this point in his career. He had a lot of hype coming out of college, was the 5th overall pick, but he has not lived up to that at all. I honestly wouldn't even consider him Chicago's starting point guard anymore. I think at this point that goes to Kobe White, who they drafted with the 7th overall pick, who I think is a better player than Chris Dunn right off the bat. And then here we go with DJ Augustin, and he's a mediocre starter in my opinion, and that's not really a knock on DJ Augustin. There's just a lot of other good NBA point guards that are better players than he is. He had a very solid year last season for the Orlando Magic, helped them make the playoffs, helped them win that game 1 against Toronto, but he's still nothing better than a mediocre starting point guard in the NBA. And then here we go with Derek White. He's another mediocre starting point guard, but considering what he was going into this season, that's not an insult at all, because he got a lot better last season, and he's still a young guy. He's that prototypical Spurs type of prospect that they picked up at the end of the first round and have developed into already a very decent player. So mediocre starter, that's not a knock on Derek White. Here we go with D'Angelo Russell, and D'Angelo Russell is another very tough guy to rank, and he goes in this good starter tier. I should have probably named all these guys fringe all-star level players. Actually, that's what I'm going to do, because all these guys are fringe all-stars in my opinion. It feels like I'm underrating them a bit by just calling them good starters. So here we go with fringe all-stars. And then here we're going to go fringe superstars. That makes a lot more sense in my opinion. Fringe all-stars and fringe superstars, because of how good this position is. Here we go with Kyrie, who basically kind of screwed over the Boston Celtics organization. He was the center of their dysfunction last season, and I'm taking leadership and accountability into account here, and Kyrie just doesn't have superstar leadership or superstar accountability. He threw a lot of his teammates under the bus, so although he's very, very talented, probably going to be the most talented player in this tier, other things that you have to take into account, I think, keep him below that superstar tier. Here we go with Lonzo Ball, and I think I gotta go with mediocre starter. If it wasn't for his very, very good defense, then I definitely have him as a bad starter. He's in a new situation in New Orleans. We'll see how that works out for him. I don't think he's ever going to be an all-star level player. It's hard to see that ever panning out. I know he's still young. I know he was the second overall pick, but I think the Lakers reached with that pick, and then they gave him away for Anthony Davis, along with another second overall pick, a bunch of future picks. So that showed me that they didn't value Lonzo Ball like they did when they drafted him. He's just not a good offensive player, and I can't put a player that isn't a good offensive player in the fringe all-star tier. So he's a mediocre starter in my opinion. I could also make the argument that he could be a bad starter as well, but we're going to keep him in that tier. And then we have Trey Young, who at this point is a mediocre starter, but he's definitely approaching this fringe all-star tier. He was not a good NBA player for the first half of last season, but the second half he probably played like a fringe all-star level player. He was very, very good. So the book is still out on him in my opinion. We'll see what he does in year 2, but out of all these guys that are going to be in these bottom 2 tiers, Trey Young is definitely by far the most talented out of all of them, and he could easily make the jump to this fringe all-star tier next season. Here we go with Damian Lillard. He's the other superstar on my list, second best point guard in the league, and I knocked Kyrie for his lack of leadership, his lack of accountability. He did not set a good culture last season with the Boston Celtics. Damian Lillard is the opposite of that. Great leader, sets the culture, and you look at these guys' stats and they're not all that different. Kyrie's a little bit more efficient. Damian Lillard, in my opinion, is a little better passer. They're pretty even in terms of their skill set and in terms of their talent on the court, but everything else, all the intangibles, Damian Lillard has them in spades. Kyrie doesn't have them at all, so therefore Damian Lillard is a superstar player in my opinion. And then here we go with Jamal Murray, and this is another very tough one to figure out because I don't think he's better than any of the players in this fringe all-star tier, but I do think he's better than all the players in this mediocre starter tier. So oh man, what do I do with Jamal Murray? I think I gotta put him in this fringe all-star tier because he's the second best player on a team that was battling for the 1 seed in the Western Conference all season long. He's not super efficient. He's not a good defender. I don't think he's as good as any of these guys. I think he's probably going to be the worst player in the fringe all-star tier, but that's where I got to put him for now. And here we go with another bad starter. That's Jalen Brunson. I know he had flashes last season. He's just not proven enough for me to put him anywhere above this bad starter tier. He's still young. He still has a chance to prove himself, but this is where he's going to rest for now. Here we go with another bad starter. That's Alfred Payton. Alfred Payton just isn't a good player. I also can't remember. I think he signed with the New York Knicks. Usually I'm on top of this type of stuff, but the New York Knicks signed so many people that they all kind of blur together. It was just a bunch of mediocre players. I'm pretty sure he signed with the Knicks. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comment section below, but I'm not even sure if he'll start next season because you got Dennis Smith Jr. playing for them. So Dennis Smith Jr. isn't even on this list. I'd put Dennis Smith Jr. as a mediocre starter. Alfred Payton, he would be a bad starter if he was still a starting point guard. Here we go with Ricky Rubio, and it's another tough guy, but I also have him as a mediocre starter. It feels kind of weird putting these guys next to Trey Young because Trey Young is so much better than them. I'm moving Trey Young up to Fringe All-Star. So everybody that hated on me in the comments already for only putting Trey Young as a mediocre starter next to all these guys, you can calm down now. So here we go with, we do have Dennis Smith Jr. on the list. Dennis Smith Jr., in my opinion, is a mediocre point guard. He has a ton of physical talent, great athlete. He just has to score at a more efficient clip. I think he has the scoring package to be able to make a bunch of different types of shots. He just doesn't make them often enough to be a good player because he's going to need to be an efficient scorer to be a good NBA player because he doesn't bring much playmaking at the point guard position. He doesn't bring much rebounding. He doesn't defend well. So he needs to be an efficient scorer, but he's still figuring that out. So that's why he's only a mediocre starter. Here we go with De'Aaron Fox. And De'Aaron Fox, I also have to put as a Fringe All-Star, and this list is getting very, very weird. I'm gonna have to make a change here. I'm going to have to make this mediocre starters. I think this will look a lot better. Mediocre starters, there we go. There's a bunch of them. Here we go with good starters, and we're gonna bring down De'Aaron Fox, Trey Young, Jamal Murray. We're also going to put down Eric Bledsoe. So I think this tier list actually looks a lot better now that we sorted this out. There's just so many good NBA point guards that I think it only makes sense to have 4 good tiers and 1 bad one. Mediocre starter, another one, that is Jeff Teague, and he's just not a good NBA point guard anymore. He was a very good NBA point guard, but his efficiency has fallen off the cliff. He can't really shoot, can't really defend. He's getting up there in age a little bit, so he's a mediocre starter in my opinion. Because this tier is filling up, Darren Collison is retired. We're going to take him out of there. Here we go with Tyler Johnson. He's another mediocre starter. He's also very overpaid. I don't even got much to say about him. He's a mediocre starter. Here we go with Reggie Jackson, and I got to keep Reggie Jackson down here as a mediocre starter as well. He can definitely score the ball, but he's not super consistent. He's not efficient. He has his injury issues, so he's hardly even consistently on the court in the first place. So I have him as a mediocre starter. He might be the best mediocre starter out of all these guys, but honestly, it's hard to say he's even that much better than a guy like DJ Augustin or Derek White. Derek White, I'm going to move up to here as well. But yeah, so this is what we're looking at right now. And here we go with Gilgeous-Alexander, who just got traded to OKC, and I think he's also a good starter, has a lot of potential. This whole tier has a lot of guys that will definitely be a Fringe All-Star level player. You got Fox, Trey Young, Jamal Murray, maybe even Derek White and Gilgeous-Alexander. All these guys will definitely be at least Fringe All-Stars at some point in their career, possibly even Fringe Superstars once these guys start declining. So I really like the young point guard crop here, and Gilgeous-Alexander is another one of those players. Tall, big guard, 6'6", can defend, can score the ball a little bit. The knock on him coming into his rookie season was that he couldn't shoot the ball, but he shot 36% from 3 last season, so I like him as a good starter with a lot of upside going forward. Here we go with John Wall, who's probably not going to play next season for it, so we're not even going to rank him because who knows what he is after he comes back from the injury issues he's been dealing with. Then here we are with Justice Winslow, and a lot of people would put him here. I think he's a little bit overrated. I'm going to put him down here. He's just not super efficient yet. He's not a good enough shooter yet. It's hard to even say he's a point guard because they do have Goran Dragic. He's more of a point forward. I was surprised that he's the guy on this list instead of Dragic. We're just going to roll with him as a mediocre starter, but he is in the top tier of the mediocre starters. And then the last guy we're going to rank is Colin Sexton, who was one of the worst players in the NBA last season. If he can figure out how to run an NBA team to go along with his athletic ability, his quickness, his motor, then I do think he'll be a good NBA starter at some point. But for now, he's a mediocre starter, and that's even if he improves mightily over last season, because last season he was awful. So anyway, let me know what you think of this point guard tier list. Let me know who I ranked too low. Let me know who I ranked too high. And with that being said, that's a wrap for this tier list. This has been Tori. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Peace out. Go Blazers.